Hi everyone, today we're going to talk about force plate testing and programming that you can create from your force plate test results. And before we get into it, I just wanted to kind of share my background with it. And that as these force plates were gaining popularity and coming around the weight room a little bit, uh, I was I was kind of against it. I was a little rigid against it, and I kind of thought that it was going to take away my ability to be creative as a coach and to have a philosophy. And what I've really realized over time is that it's just another tool. And what it actually does is it streamlines my creativity and my philosophy. And it helps me have a much stronger uh, rationale for what I'm doing with my athletes. So I am a converted believer, and I wanted to just kind of share some information with you all about it in the event that you are able to utilize these force plates now or in the future. They're a great tool, and here we go. Okay, force plates can provide information that the naked eye cannot. And what I mean by that is that as we gain experience as coaches, when we're watching our athletes move, we're constantly breaking down what they're doing and analyzing it and using it as a sort of an informal test. And what the force plate lets us do is take a quick jump, a few jumps on the scales, and all of a sudden we now have this array of data that we didn't have before. And it just helps us identify weaknesses and utilize certain movements to help us improve our physical abilities. So what was subjective becomes objective, accurate, and reliable. And what are the force plates? They're basically just fancy scales. So they're measuring the force that's placed into them, and they're taking measurements, thousands of measurements per second. You place 1 foot on each scale, and you can do different jump types. You can do counter movement, no counter movement. You can start from boxes. You can start from standing. You can do push-up variations and have your hands on the force plates to do upper body measurements. You can compare from 1 foot to the other, unilateral comparisons. There's so many factors that are available for analysis. Great tool, and just something that, again, I was hesitant to use them and to buy into them. But now they're an awesome tool that I try to use as often as possible. So at Lindenwood University, where I'm at, the hardware that I've been using is Hawken Dynamics. Hawken Dynamics has software as well that we use. But if I really wanted to talk about the software, the approach that I'm using. So again, we use the Hawken Dynamics software, but Sparta Science is a company out in Menlo Park, California, and they are who I really sort of do my learning from, and it's their philosophy is kind of what I'm pursuing when I use the force plates. When I get my data, I sort of use the approach that they popularized, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. All right. Forgive me while I read here. The Sparta platform aggregates patented force plate data, the Sparta scan, to identify key thresholds for resilience. Each scan is analyzed by an 8-year database and produces unique insights specific to the athlete's sport and position. Referred to as a movement signature, these insights are made up with 3 key variables: load, explode, and drive, presenting individual strengths and weaknesses. So, although there are many options for the use of information that you get from just individual jumps, with all those options, what I do that's simple for me, something that I can utilize quickly and that I'm familiar with, is the idea of load, explode, and drive. To visualize that a little bit, load is going from a standing position, and then this is a counter movement jump, so you're dropping down. So what that's going to look like in sport is maybe landing after collecting a rebound in the air, or striking a volleyball in the air, or if you're a field-based sport, maybe sprinting forward and then decelerating. So that's load. I like the saying is sort of what good is a Ferrari if it doesn't have brakes? So a lot of times with our athletes, we're constantly building their speed and their ability to lift weights and produce power, but that load is going to remind us and keep us grounded for how well are our athletes able to absorb power and to reduce their speed and to decelerate. So that's a big injury area, is when athletes are decelerating and going to change the direction. It's something that's important, that's often overlooked. Explode is when we take all that power that's coming downwards and we start to transfer it back up. So it's going to bridge the gap between absorbing power and producing power. And again, as athletes, that's going to kind of be what separates you just from somebody that's good in the weight room. So lots of athletes can go lift weights and look great and things like that, but can they perform on the field? Can they be more athletic? So that explode factor is where that comes into play. And drive is your ability to finish that movement and produce power and to get up in the air. And then what we're going to do today is we're going to discuss what a few jumps on the force plates is going to end up looking like when the data is presented to you. And so in a single test, you might do 3 individual counter movement jumps. That's the pattern that I choose to look at and analyze. Again, you can do a wide variety of options there, but that's the approach that I take. So again, jumping, what to the naked eye might look like somebody who's just jumping up and down real quick. The scales are going to scan it, break it down into these 3 variables, and then within each variable, they're going to collect a lot of data that my eyes personally could not grab. And then with those measurements, they're going to give us some fancy charts there that we get to look at. All right, let's check it out. All right, again, load, explode, and drive. Our jumps become charts. Okay, I think I kind of discussed that already, but if you want their definitions, I put them in here. All right, so let's dive in here. we're doing healthy movement signatures. So just a warning is that after this, we're going to discuss movement signatures that are concerning, that kind of require intervention a little bit. So linear is just that step, that step ladder there, that staircase, excuse me. The insight on that is that they build force throughout their movement. So they're going to be an athlete that might be a little bit better at their top end speed. Now this could be an athlete who plays chess, but it's a little bit more conducive to being a wide receiver, center fielder, forwards, wing, fullback. Okay, we want someone who has room to express that power. All right, so wide receiver, if it's football, maybe a lineman having the linear signature, and maybe you could do something to kind of change a little bit to benefit them. If it's in baseball, maybe a shortstop, maybe you can change their scan a little bit. And through training, we can change their scans, which is sort of the whole point of today. So just to make sure I've mentioned that before. Forwards and wings. So if you've got a goalie with this type of scan, again, maybe you could do something different to kind of benefit them a little bit. Fullback, same thing, same idea. Rotational. So look for that U shape for your rotational athlete. So having worked with track and field throwers before, those are rotational athletes. And just think quarterbacks, pitchers, golfers. And then what are you really doing? You're briefly losing force before using timing to regain tension. So very strong on the front end with your load, very powerful on the back end with your drive. And for that explode, they relax in order to use their timing to regain tension. Lateral would be sort of the upside down U shape there, the bell curve really. And where we're looking at the ability to accelerate and change directions quickly. And some examples down here. So this is lateral, also known as a middle finger drive, right? Again, I would not necessarily scan a team of players and then move players into different positions based on their scans. I don't know that it's quite that powerful, that it's going to change determine your skill set. But what it is going to do is it is going to be a reflection of performance, and it's going to be a predictor of injuries. So paying attention to it, not so much from the idea that it's going to tell us where to put athletes, but tell us how to train athletes to boost performance and how to reduce injuries. So and then a reoccurring theme that we'll talk about today that I didn't talk on just yet. Right there. We want all variables to be above 45. So anything below 45 would be sort of a marker for concern. And then when you get variables that start to be 15 points away from one another, that's an issue as well, because that means that there's some imbalance there. So again, the way the body should be working together in these different movements, if there's a disparity of 15 or more, it means that there's a little bit of a heightened chance for injury, because maybe going back to the Ferrari with no brakes, could be an individual who can produce a whole lot of power, but can't really absorb it and doesn't have a good set of brakes on. Maybe they're, and I'll leave it at that and we'll just talk more about it soon. All right. So kept our little blue chart from the previous slide, so we can compare healthy to risky, I guess. Okay, extreme load. Yeah, again, look at for that 15 or more. So that's a 20-point disparity and a 25-point disparity. And they've done so much research and spent so much time collecting data on this that not only can they sort of talk to you a little bit about the movement inefficiency, but some examples of specific injuries that might come with it. And having had this in the weight room for a handful of years at Linwood, it's kind of scary that we've actually seen some accurate predictions. Now, on the other hand, some people have terrible scans and they go on to be excellent athletes who have no injuries whatsoever. So it's not a death sentence, but the data has been providing us with anecdotal evidence as well. So with this first individual here, so they are unable to absorb force. Okay, they're unable to absorb force. Not a great thing for athletes, especially if they need to change directions. So what's going to happen is, if you've ever seen an athlete go down with an injury, with a non-contact injury, when they're just out in open space performing a cut, yeah, it's kind of scary, especially if it ends up being an ACL. Somebody just minding their own business and doing a drill in the middle of a game, and they just kind of look like they got shot by somebody off in the distance. They just go down, kind of like you see in the action movies. About a week drive, there's a 20-point disparity from the first two factors to our drive factors. So inability to finish smoothly. So muscular issues, and also your performance is you're probably just gonna be a little bit behind performance wise. So maybe some of your athletes who are technically sound but just don't have the ability to win races or to hit home runs or to collect rebounds over equal athletes of the equal height. Yeah, and extreme explode, a 20-point disparity there, 22-point disparity there. But I also want to point out that this is less than 45, which is, if it's a 20-point or a 15-point disparity or more from a neighboring factor or variable, or if it's below 45 points, then it's a point for concern. So for that weak drive, it's kind of two strikes against them. Extreme explode. mobility and strength issues. They're gonna wear and tear their hip labrums and their low back. All right, pardon me while I read a little bit here. The SPART scan takes a comprehensive look into an athlete's movement qualities by measuring force production. The magnitude as well as the efficiency of force production is analyzed to determine an athlete's risk of suffering an injury and where that injury is likely to occur. It is easy to measure performance outputs like vertical jump height, but two athletes that jump 35 inches may use entirely different mechanisms to produce that leap. When variables are more than 15 points away from each other, the athlete is mechanically imbalanced and at an increased risk of injury. A score below 45 is an indicator that a lack of strength relative to their peers and also indicates risk for injury. So the way that these scans work is the data is aggregated. So lots of jumps from a pool of athletes is going to help create your scan metrics. So if I get a pair of plates and I start up some scans and I have no other athletes included in my database, the first jump, it could come from your grandma with one leg. It could come from an NFL caliber or wide receiver or whatever. The first person that jumps on there is going to have hundreds across the board because they're being compared to no one. They're the best. They're automatically winning. But as you add more bodies in there, it's going to compare it to your peer groups. So if you were to do it with children, you wouldn't have them being compared to, athletes in their prime. So you can create good little peer groups in pockets, which is good, especially if you're at a different level. Maybe you're at the high school level and the force plates have been used mostly with college and professional athletes. You don't want to compare them across the board, and vice versa. You don't want your multi-million-dollar athletes being compared against school children. Duplicate slide there. We can skip that one. Here we go. All right, so looking at some more extreme movement signatures. So I've discussed those already. So let's move on to our low movement signatures. Gosh, okay, so that's below 45 there. And it's also 24 points below their top factor over here. So I don't know if you guys can see that. So there's a 52 over there. So you got a 24-point disparity from one factor to another, and you're also below the 45-point marker. So patellar tendinitis would be an issue that you might find, or it might present itself. So it suggests growing strength as well as ankle range of motion. So again, not just looking at how to get stronger, but how to move better. And when you can get those two combined and aligned, you're in business. You're doing some good things. About our low explode. Again, that's below 45. So that's trouble. And then it's actually 15 points or greater disparity from both of the other factors. And I can just kind of barely make it out, but that factor on the right there, that drive, is at 47. So what do you have? You have poor posture stability, and you're probably going to get some hip issues. Low drive below 45 and 15-point disparity from our first two factors to our final factor, and likely to incur muscle strains and muscle issues on top of not being very athletic, if that's what you're going for. Maybe they want to be a bodybuilder and that's not such a factor, but if they want to go out and produce powerful dynamic motions, we might be in trouble. All right, so if you want to sort of cut to the meat of how to solve or improve some issues, this is a great slide for us. So sorry it took us so long to get here, but now that we are, let's spend some time here. All right, looking at load, and on your software, they may not call it, if you're ever on the site, they may not call it load. It'd be the breaking rate of force development. Okay, so that would be the factor that you would click on, because again, you can look at so many different things on here. So load, aka breaking rate of force development, ability to create force deceleration through the anterior chain strength, controlling triple flexion. We love triple flexion for athletes, but that's like building the speed on the Ferrari. Our ability to perform load, aka breaking rate of force development, aka deceleration, is going to help us put some brakes on the Ferrari. And then this is the big one. All right, this is how we improve load. You've got low load numbers. This is how to get them better. Squat, bench press, bent over row, med ball slam, box step off, pogos. Big movements that challenge your anterior chain and your core stability. So who has good load? Big, strong individuals. Well, not necessarily big, but strong individuals. If they are good in the weight room, they tend to be good at those three movements, particularly, or kind of obvious to watch. So if you've got an athlete who's good at squatting and benching and bent over rows, they're going to be a little bit more injury resistant to like ACL tears, a little bit lower risk. And they might be all brakes though. They might not be much of a Ferrari. They might be safe and sound, but they may not be producing as athletes. So you kind of get, there's pluses and minuses. Our next factor, explode. Again, if you find yourself looking for data or looking for factors, the software would call that the average relative propulsive force. And what is it measuring really? It's your ability to transfer force. sort of about the stiffness and bracing of torso. Again, think this explode factor is when you're absorbing force and changing direction at the bottom of your squat. So it's bridging the gap between dropping into a squat and driving out of it. It allows for an efficient transfer of energy through torso. Because remember, our torso, our core doesn't really create energy, it more transfers it. And this is a great example of that. Exercises to increase deadlift or RDL, power clean, pull-ups. So those are great exercises because they are so core dependent. And then, yes, you can just do core anti-movements. And what's a core anti-movement? Well, might be sitting on the couch eating pizza, because that's going to be terrible for your core. But what it really means is anti-rotation, like a Pallof press, anti-flexion, like a plank, I guess that'd be anti-extension, excuse me. Anti-flexion would be like a good morning. Something awkward like a one-arm overhead press, really just challenging your core again. And then that third factor, drive. And if you're on software looking for what to call drive, especially load, explode, and drive are that's lingo from Sparta. And then these other little carroted, titles of factors is how you would find it on Hawken Dynamics. And it's so I guess it's just the terminology that you'd expect to see across the different platforms. Ability to prolong force production, long compliant posterior chain muscular contractions, triple extension. This is what we spend so much time working on athletes with, is triple extension, giving them speed, giving them power, utilizing momentum. So RFE, glute bridge, med ball rotational exercises, some different types of jumps there. So building the posterior chain and building the ability to produce power, especially living off of triple extension. As coaches, if we're working with athletes, triple extension helps us produce power and be a little bit more competitive. If we're working with the general population, we want to use triple extension for activities of daily living, picking up grocery bags, playing, chasing after kids and children and walking, your dog, whatever it is. Yeah, so triple extension is big. We sort of live and die off that as strength coaches. Okay, so now let's hang out here for a little bit longer. Let's say I'm coaching a group of synchronized swimmers or table tennis athletes or wrestlers or whoever I'm coaching. What you can do is, instead of just taking these scans and these jumps and measuring them and saying, Johnny needs to work on his load, Sally needs to work on her explode, Pat needs to work on their drive. Instead of just kind of saying it and putting it out there, you can do something about it. You can take this information and you can fairly easily impact this athlete's training and try to work on their scan a little bit. So here's how you might go about it. Let's say it's a lower body day. You want to train some lower body. whoever it is, Johnny, make Johnny squat, have Sally do deadlift or RDL, and have Pat do a RFE split squat. Boom, lower body training that is personalized and individualized based on their scans. Let's say we've got an upper body movement in there. We want to do some pressing. Johnny bench presses. Sally does a 1-arm overhead press. And Pat can probably kind of take their pick. So not going to be the upper body pressing, not going to be the most pertinent movement for that drive. And then for upper body posterior chain, again, Johnny and Sally have individual kind of ideas there. And then for Pat in the drive category, it may not be as crucial or impactful. You could just have them do maybe some med ball rotational exercises, something like that. So, however you want to train them. And again, I think it's a mistake to train. I personally don't train football players like football players. I don't train sprinters like sprinters. I train my athletes to be better athletes. Yes, there's absolutely some deviation pertaining to their specific sport. Maybe injuries injuries like my women's soccer players. I want to watch out for ACL injuries big time. But I also want to start to incorporate some of these movement signatures and try to make this a factor as well. But you're also going to bring in maybe their FMS scores, maybe their training history. Depends on what equipment you have, things like that. So again, I would use these, but maybe not make this the only thing you're training for. Because if you get really inundated by training to change their scans, you might forget to do injury prevention for their specific sport. You may forget their injury history as individual athletes, so on and so forth. And then another thing that's kind of nice, kind of strange, kind of convenient is that certain teams will have very similar scans. And so it feels a little intimidating to train a team with maybe 40 athletes, and you start scanning them. And you're thinking, oh gosh, this is going to be a real juggling act. But then after scanning them, you realize 90% of these athletes have similar scans. I can just if I train one way for the whole team, I'm only going to have a few athletes that I'm going to have them do a different movement on a certain day. So my wrestlers and my women's soccer players have both shown to have that low drive over here. So what do? Is I create a program for low drive, and I identify athletes who maybe their explode factor is a little bit lower and needs some work. So my wrestlers are a lot of short wrestlers. So their exploding tends to be their core tends to be really strong. Not only are there wrestlers who depend on their core a whole lot, but when you get a little bit shorter, that's a shorter lever, and so there's less stress on there. So if I have a couple of tall wrestlers chances are when the team squats, chances are I might go have them deadlift instead, because their core, being a taller athlete, is naturally going to be a little bit weaker. So when they have scans, that might benefit them a little bit, is to just get a stronger core. Whereas some of my athletes who are 5'5" and look like they're carved out of stone, they may not need that, that core work as much. And then I'm still talking about wrestling now. All of my wrestlers tend to be low drive because their sport does not really reward high power output. This isn't, they're not throwing javelin, they're not jumping the high jump. What they tend to do is go in and see who can exhaust the other fighter over the course of 7 minutes. So it helps to be powerful. And as athletes, that tends to be their weakness over the last few seasons of recording their movement signatures. And then my women's soccer is kind of the same way. It's so conditioning based, and so with such constant movement, it doesn't always pay to be super powerful, because when the more you train for power and drive, the less endurance you're going to have. So kind of funny how that works. And then if you look at wrestlers, they kind of sit on their toes, and they're bobbing and kind of sitting on their quads a little bit. So their posterior chain with triple extension is not going to be hyperdeveloped. And then my ladies soccer players as well. If you next time you see a women's soccer player walking around, they tend to have pretty big quads. It's because in soccer, your average sprint in soccer is about 12 yards, and then you're decelerating, putting on the brakes, and then changing your directions again. So they really live and die by their ability to decelerate. Okay, types of athletes. I don't know how much time we need to spend on this. Yeah, I think we've sort of talked our way through that already. Predicting injury risk. Again, just to really connect the dots a little bit more, this is a good one. So a difference of more than 15 and any variables less than 45 is when we start to really worry about this. So for load, higher risk for some foot breaks and for some ACL tears. And some lower concerns there. Explode, gonna have more hip issues, low back issues, and oblique issues. And what's low there is high ankle sprains, SI joint issues, sports hernias. Drive, high issue, ligament issues within the knee, and then patellar issues as well. So good reference just on things to work on, things to watch out for. Honestly, that's all I have for today. I just want to make sure everybody's familiar with force plate scans and see how we connect the dots between our scans, what we need to work on, why we need to work on it, what simple movements to plug in, and how our scans are a reflection of our abilities. And sometimes your sport changes your scan. Sometimes your natural movement patterns make you better at a sport that other people are also attracted to. So it's kind of the chicken and the egg is, does your sport change your scan, or does your, even though you may have never been scanned before, does your movement pattern put you into a sport? Are you better fitted to a certain sport because of just how you naturally move and things like that? But we can change your scan. We see scan changes all the time from training. So I think the only thing I wanted to bring up that I didn't, I don't know if I got like one final thought for you guys, and it's not too profound. So on this rotational score, you know, 1 year I have track and field throwers and working with them, and we have lots of low back issues. Well, their scans, they're very, very strong and very, very powerful. As rotational athletes, that's not uncommon. But their scores are so extreme that their scores are so extreme that it's no wonder that the year before we were plagued with low back issues. But there's other factors like the coach experimenting and trying new things, like overweighted throwing and maybe being too aggressive with it. Not to blame anybody. As a coach, as coaches, you collaborate, and I would never say that all the fault lies with that coach because they did too much weight out of practice. Because when I look at it, I could have been doing more core stability, more core anti-core movements because of their force plate scans. So looking at it, I had a rationale for why they were injured. I had a rationale for how I could improve. So, just if you have the chance to use these scans, do so. And all it's going to do is provide you with a stronger rationale. So with my track and field athletes, 1 year I have a bunch of low back issues. And then I change my training. I become much more core focused. We start moving slower with our big lifts to highlight and emphasize core stability. We start bringing in a lot more of the just core isolating movements. And the next year, big reduction, almost an elimination of low back pain. And is that from what I was doing or what their track coaches were doing? I'll never know, but I do know that my rationale for what I was doing and why I was doing it was strengthened, because looking at injury history and at their force plate scans and putting those together just gave me a little bit better rationale for what I was doing and why I was doing it. So it kind of goes back to my fear of the force plate scan initially, is not wanting to be told what to do or how to do it, but it actually strengthens my logic and my rationale for how to help athletes out. So it is a great tool. All right. Thanks, guys.